Snow fell thick and heavy across the quiet town of Silver Creek, coating every rooftop and fence post in soft white silence. The saloon windows glowed amber against the cold night, laughter spilling into the wind like a stubborn flame refusing to die. Inside, cowboys and drifters huddled near the fire, boots caked with ice, whiskey burning their throats as they swapped stories of bad luck and broken hearts. And at the far end of the bar sat Cole Maddox, the man folks called the Iron Cowboy, the kind who didn't believe in weakness, women, or second chances. Cole wasn't much for company, but tonight was his birthday, and the ranch hands had dragged him here to celebrate. He leaned back in his chair, hat low, watching the room through half-lidded eyes. His reputation stretched from Wyoming to Montana, a rancher who built his fortune with his own calloused hands. But behind the legend was a man tired of people trying to prove something to him, or take something from him. So when a few local men began boasting about how no woman could handle his frozen mountain cabin for a night, where the wind screamed, through the pines and the wolves kept their distance out of respect, and he let them talk. Until one of them, half drunk and mean, said, "Bet you $1 million no woman alive could last a night up there." The saloon fell silent, every head turning toward Cole. He smirked, slow and dangerous. $1 million steep for a fool's bet. The drunk leaned forward. "Then lower it." 10,000? Cole set his glass down, the ice clinking softly. If a woman thinks she's tougher than snow, storms, and silence, she can name her price. But no one's come close, and that's when she walked in. Lena Hart, the new waitress at the Rusty Spur, brushed snow from her hair and stepped inside. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, eyes bright and determined. She'd been in Silver Creek for just 3 weeks, waiting tables to save enough money to get her little sister out of foster care back in Utah. Everyone knew she worked double shifts and lived in a run-down cabin near the river, but no one really saw her. Not until now. Cole noticed her the second she entered. Something in the way she moved, quiet but sure, caught his attention. She didn't look like most of the women who came through these doors. There was strength in her shoulders and a kind of stubborn grace in her gaze. She took an order, smiled politely at the cowboys, and ignored their crude jokes. "Hey, Lena," called one of the men, grinning. "You think you could last a night at Cole's mountain cabin?" The room laughed. She froze, tray in hand, and then looked toward Cole. Their eyes met, his cold as river ice, hers sharp and steady. "I could," she said simply. The laughter died quick. Cole raised an eyebrow. "You don't even know what you're agreeing to, miss." "I've slept in worse places," she replied. "And I've got no reason to back down from a challenge." The men roared with disbelief, slapping the table, shouting for details. Cole stood up, his height commanding instant silence. He crossed the room slowly until he stood before her, snow still melting off his coat. "You'd really go up there? Alone? Just to prove me wrong?" Lena tilted her chin. "Not to prove you wrong. To prove I can survive what you think no woman can." The room went dead quiet. For a heartbeat, Cole almost smiled. Not the kind that mocked, but one that almost respected her courage. He nodded once, then said, "All right, Miss Hart. Tomorrow night, sunset. You come up to Maddox Ridge, stay till morning, and I'll write you a check for $1 million. The men shouted, glasses clinking, bets flying across the room. Lena's hand trembled only slightly as she set down the tray. "You'd better make sure that check doesn't bounce, cowboy." Cole laughed, the first real sound of warmth from him all night. "I don't bounce, sweetheart, but neither does the mountain." Outside, snow continued to fall, soft and endless, as two lives quietly shifted toward something neither of them could name. And though neither of them said it aloud, everyone in that saloon felt the same unspoken thing. Whatever happened up on that mountain, Silver Creek would never forget the night a waitress took a millionaire's dare. By morning, Silver Creek looked like it had been swallowed by winter. The snowdrifts reached up to wagon wheels, and the wind howled through the town like a living thing. Most folks stayed inside, curtains drawn, fires crackling. But Lena Hart wasn't most folks. She stood outside the livery stable, wrapping her scarf tight, her breath fogging in the air. A single horse, always a big chestnut gelding with a white blaze, waited for her, saddled and snorting steam. Cole Maddox was already there, tightening the reins. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice deep, steady, and not as teasing as it had been last night. "I said I'd come," Lena answered, chin up. "You don't think I'd back out now, do you?" Cole gave her a long, unreadable look. I think most people don't know what they're walking into till the snow shuts behind them. But suit yourself. He adjusted his gloves and swung up onto his black stallion. Keep close. The ridge'll eat you alive if you don't follow my lead. She didn't reply, just climbed up on the gelding with quiet confidence. Her hands were red with cold, but her eyes stayed fixed on the path ahead. Cole glanced over once, just once, and for a fleeting second he admired her grit. She didn't complain, didn't flinch when the wind cut like knives. There was something pure about that kind of stubborn courage. They rode out of town under a pale rising sun. The world around them was silent, endless white stretching over the hills, the trees heavy with frost. The only sounds were the crunch of hooves and the occasional creak of leather. It should have been peaceful, but there was tension in the air. Not the sharp kind that breaks things, but the kind that hums quietly, building heat beneath the cold. After an hour, the trail narrowed into a winding climb through pine forest. Snow kept falling, soft and relentless. Cole rode ahead, clearing the path with his horse. Every now and then he'd look back to check on her. Not that he'd admit it. He told himself it was just part of the deal. But each time he saw her sitting tall in the saddle, refusing to shiver, he found himself wanting to know what had made her so strong. You're not from around here, he said finally, raising his voice over the wind. No, Lena called back. Utah. Got family there? One sister, she said after a pause. She's 12. Foster care, Cole didn't press. He could tell from her tone it was a wound that didn't need poking. But it stuck in his head anyway, the way she said it, quiet but full of fight. They reached a clearing around noon, where the mountains opened wide and the valley below shimmered white. The ridge loomed ahead, black rock and snow rising into low gray clouds. Cole dismounted and checked her saddle. From here on, the trail gets mean. You still want to go? Lena slid down, stretching her stiff legs. You think a little snow's gonna scare me? He smirked. You talk big for a girl who's never seen the ridge. She smiled, and for the first time it wasn't polite. It was real, teasing. You talk big for a man who thinks women melt. Cole's laugh came out low and surprised. It warmed the cold air for a moment. All right, Miss Hart, you win that one. They pushed on, climbing higher into the wilderness. The storm thickened until the world turned white, and the sky disappeared. The horses moved slow, heads low. Every breath burned cold. At one point, Lena's scarf tore loose, flying into the snow, and Cole reached out to catch it before it vanished. Their gloved hands brushed for just a second, nothing more, but it lingered between them like something neither could shake off. By the time they reached Maddox Ridge, the light was fading. The cabin appeared through the storm like a ghost, rough-hewn logs, smoke curling weakly from the chimney. Cole had built it years ago, back when he still believed in things like peace and solitude. Now it looked almost too lonely, even for him. Home, sweet home, he muttered. Lena slid off the horse, her boots sinking deep in snow. Her breath came out in short clouds as she looked around. The wide clearing, the dark pines, the silence so thick it pressed on her ears. It's beautiful, she whispered. Cole stared at her like she'd said something impossible. No one had ever called that ridge beautiful before. You're the first to say that, he murmured. Inside, the cabin was small but sturdy. One big room with a fireplace, a bed, a table, and shelves lined with old tins and tools. Cole lit the lanterns while Lena brushed snow off her coat. The fire came alive slowly, filling the space with flickering gold. She stood close to the hearth, holding her hands out to the warmth. Cole watched her quietly. The snow in her hair melted into droplets that slid down her neck. He turned away before his thoughts went where they shouldn't. You'll sleep there, he said gruffly, nodding toward the bed. I'll take the chair, she frowned. You built this cabin for one person, right? Why make it sound like I'm taking something from you? Because you are, he said simply, but there was no bite in it, just truth. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm outside raged harder, wind hammering against the windows, but inside it was calm, quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. Lena sat on the edge of the bed and looked at him through the firelight. You don't talk much, do you? Talking's overrated, he replied, pulling off his gloves. Maybe, but silence can lie too. That made him look up. Their eyes met across the fire, blue meeting brown, steady and searching. And in that look, something shifted again, something small but real. Cole turned away first. You should sleep. Tomorrow morning, I'll see if you're still sure you can handle the ridge. She smiled faintly. I already am. Outside, the wind howled against the mountains, but neither of them noticed how close they already were to breaking the bet. Not through weakness, but through the quiet pull of something stronger than pride. The storm came down the mountain like a living thing, wild and merciless. By dusk, the world outside the cabin had vanished in white, and even the trees seemed to disappear into the wind. Snow piled high against the windows, and the roof creaked under the weight. Inside, the fire burned strong but low, the only sound besides the wind's howl and the occasional crack of wood splitting in the hearth. Lena sat by the fire, wrapped in one of Cole's old blankets, her hands clasped around a tin mug of coffee. She stared into the flames, watching them twist and flicker. Every now and then she glanced toward the man sitting across the room. Broad shoulders, jaw shadowed with stubble, hat tipped low. He looked carved from stone, unmoved by the storm outside, but she could sense the way his eyes kept finding her reflection in the window glass. It wasn't supposed to feel like this, warm, charged, and dangerous all at once. She'd come to prove something, to win a bet that could change her life, not to feel the strange flutter in her chest whenever he looked at her. Cole broke the silence first. You ever ridden through a storm like this before? She shook her head. Not like this. Utah gets snow, but not the kind that sounds like it's angry. He gave a faint smile. Mountains don't get angry. They just remind you who's boss. That sounds like something a man would say, she replied softly. That's because I've been fool enough to test them. He looked into the fire. Lost 2 cattlemen up here 5 years ago. They thought they could beat the ridge home before nightfall. Never made it. Lena's gaze softened. I'm sorry, Cole nodded, jaw tight. Ain't your fault. But it's why I warned you. This mountain doesn't care about bets. She studied him for a long moment. Then why take it? He hesitated, thumb brushing the rim of his cup. Guess I wanted to see if anyone still had the guts to try. Lena smiled faintly. Or maybe you just wanted to see me fail. His eyes flicked to hers, steady, unreadable. Maybe I wanted to see if you'd surprise me. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The wind roared outside, rattling the shutters, but inside it was still. The kind of stillness that hums before something breaks. Lena looked away first, cheeks flushed from more than just the firelight. You don't talk like most cowboys. I'm not like most cowboys, he said quietly. She smiled into her coffee. Yeah, I figured that out. Hours passed. The storm didn't let up, and the temperature dropped so fast the windows glazed with ice. Cole threw another log on the fire and pulled a heavy wool coat around her shoulders. She tried to protest, but he shook his head. You're shaking. Don't argue. I wasn't, she murmured. But the truth was, she hadn't realized how cold she was until that moment. The coat smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, and him. She tried not to breathe too deeply, but the scent wrapped around her like something alive. He sat down beside her on the floor, closer to the fire, his boots stretched out. For a long while they said nothing, just listened to the wind. Then Lena spoke softly, almost to herself. I used to think money could fix everything. That if I just had enough, I could make the world right for my sister. Cole looked over, studying her face. She's still in foster care? Lena nodded. Yeah, I send what I can. But the system doesn't make it easy. She's all I've got left. He didn't ask what happened to the rest of her family. He could see the answer in her eyes. Instead, he said, You remind me of someone I used to know. My mother. She was tougher than most men I've met. Kept our ranch running after my father died. What happened to her? She died up here. Winter storm, like this one. Tried to save a calf that got stuck near the ridge. His voice dropped low. I was 16. Lena's heart ached at the quiet pain in his words. I'm sorry, Cole. He shrugged, but it was a hollow gesture. That's why I built this place. Figured if the mountain was going to take something from me, I'd take something back. But I guess maybe that's not how peace works. For a moment, all she could hear was the fire crackling. Then she reached out and laid a hand over his, and small, gentle, warm. Peace doesn't come from fighting the storm, she said. Sometimes it comes from letting it pass and still being here after. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his fingers turned slightly, just enough that they brushed hers. And that simple touch, quiet, human, fragile, broke something open between them. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was full. heavy with the unspoken. "You know," he said finally, voice lower now, "you've already won the bet." Lena blinked. "What?" "You lasted the night." I said no woman could. She smiled, slow and soft. "The night's not over yet." He chuckled quietly, the sound deep and warm. "You planning to stay awake till sunrise just to prove a point?" "Maybe." He looked at her, really looked this time, the light flickering across her face the way her eyes caught firelight like gold. Something in his chest tightened, something he'd buried a long time ago. "Then I'll keep the fire going," he said. The hours slipped by, time stretching and folding around them. They talked about everything and nothing, about dreams, regrets, the kind of quiet loneliness that doesn't have words. And in that cabin, high above the world, surrounded by snow and wind and night, the distance between them began to melt. When the storm finally eased, a pale light seeped through the cracks in the shutters. Lena had fallen asleep by the fire, head resting against Cole's shoulder, her hand still lightly over his. He sat perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to admit how right it felt, how her presence filled a space he hadn't even known was empty. Outside, dawn was breaking, soft and pink over the snow. The world looked new again, quiet, untouched. Cole looked down at her, then at the light slowly crawling across the floorboards. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. And in that moment, he realized something far more dangerous than any bet. The mountain hadn't beaten her. She'd tamed it. When Lena opened her eyes, morning had already slipped over the ridge like a gentle hand. The fire in the hearth was down to embers, casting a soft orange glow over the cabin walls. For a moment, she didn't move, and she just listened. The wind had died. No more howling, no more snow hammering against the shutters. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it almost hummed. Then she realized her head was resting on something warm and solid. She blinked, slowly lifting her gaze, and saw Cole Maddox sitting beside her, half asleep, his arm resting along the back of the chair, his coat draped over both of them. His stubble caught the morning light, and his breath came slow and steady, like the calm after a long fight. She should have moved, should have sat up, pulled away, reminded herself that this was just a bet, a test of endurance and pride. But for that one suspended heartbeat, she didn't want to move at all. The world outside was frozen, but inside she felt safe. Cole stirred, his blue eyes opening to meet hers. For a second, neither spoke. Then his lips curved in a faint smile. "Morning, champ," she chuckled softly. "You stayed awake all night? Someone had to make sure you didn't sneak out before sunrise." His tone was teasing, but there was warmth behind it. "Well," she said, sitting up, brushing her hair back, "I guess that means I won." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes still sleepy but sharp. "You sure did." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded check. Real, with his name printed bold at the top. $1 million like I promised. Lena froze, staring at it. "You were serious?" "I don't make bets I don't mean." She hesitated, staring at the paper like it was something dangerous. Then she shook her head. "I can't take that, Cole." He frowned. "Why not? You earned it fair." "Maybe," she said softly. "But if I take it, it means this was just a bet. And I don't want it to be just that." Cole's breath caught. He hadn't expected her to say that. Of all the women he'd met, the ones who chased his money, his name, his legend, she was the only one who didn't reach for what he offered. And somehow that made him want to give her everything. He set the check down on the table between them. "You don't have to take it. But you should know I don't lose bets easy." Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe you didn't lose. Maybe we both just survived something we weren't supposed to." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe. They shared breakfast, biscuits and coffee he'd stored in the cabin, and the conversation flowed easier than either of them expected. Cole found himself talking about things he hadn't said in years. The long winters on the ranch, the silence that filled the empty halls after his mother died, the reason he'd stopped believing in forever. Lena listened without judgment, her quiet eyes holding every word. When it was her turn, she told him about her sister, about nights spent working in roadside diners, sending every dollar she could. She told him about promises made to a little girl who didn't understand why the world could be so cruel. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. "All the time," she said. But every time I get close, something keeps me here. She glanced toward him with a small, knowing smile. Guess I figured out what. Cole looked away, his throat tightening. Outside, sunlight caught the snow, setting the world ablaze with gold. It looked like the whole ridge had turned to glass. He stood and went to the window, resting his hand against the frost. You ever seen something so beautiful you're afraid to breathe? Lena came to stand beside him. The snow stretched forever, untouched, glittering, silent. Maybe that's what makes it beautiful, she said softly. You can't keep it. You can only stand still and watch. He turned toward her then, close enough that their breath mingled in the cold air. You planning to disappear once the snow melts? I came here for a reason, she said, but now I'm not sure what that reason is anymore. Their eyes locked. Neither looked away. There were no more jokes, no more walls, just two people standing in a cabin on top of a frozen world, realizing that somewhere between pride and frost, something had thawed. Cole lifted a hand, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. You could stay, he said quietly. Not because of the bet, not because of the money, just stay. Lena's heart stumbled. She told herself not to dream, not to believe in men who made promises with kind eyes. But this felt different. This wasn't a man trying to own her. This was a man trying to let her in. Cole, she whispered. I can't just... He shook his head. Don't decide now. Just think about it. The rest of the day passed slow and quiet. They cleaned up, fed the horses, watched the sun melt the snow into rivers of light. By evening, the sky turned purple and gold and the air felt soft again. The mountain no longer looked cruel. It looked peaceful, almost grateful. As night began to fall again, Cole built another fire, slower this time, deliberate. Lena sat nearby, watching him, her thoughts a blur of fear and longing. He caught her gaze and smiled just a little. You're not shivering, he said. She smiled back. Guess I'm getting used to it up here. He nodded. Maybe the mountain's getting used to you. They laughed quietly, and for a moment the world outside didn't matter. The storm, the money, the doubts, they all seemed to fade into the background. When she finally lay down that night, Cole sat in his chair again, watching the fire die down. Lena's breathing evened out, her face soft in the glow. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the check again, and folded it once more, then tossed it into the fire. The paper curled and blackened, the ink burning away until it was nothing but ash. He didn't need the bet anymore. He'd already lost. Or maybe, for the first time, he'd finally won something that mattered. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and quiet. Inside, peace settled like a blanket, warm and real. By dawn, the storm had vanished entirely. The world outside the cabin glittered under a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The mountains stood tall, draped in sunlight and snow, and the silence was peaceful this time, no longer cold or heavy but alive. It was the kind of morning that felt like a clean page, waiting for new words. Lena stood by the window, staring out at the endless white. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of coffee, steam rising like a ghost between her and the glass. Behind her, Cole moved quietly, feeding the fire, checking the horses outside, pretending he wasn't watching her every few seconds. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him sitting beside the fire, his face half in shadow, his voice rough and honest when he'd said, "You could stay." The words had burrowed deep, keeping her awake long after the storm had stopped. Now, standing there with the morning sun on her skin, she felt torn in a way she hadn't in years. Part of her wanted to pack up and ride down the mountain, back to the world she understood, the one that never stopped taking. But another part, the quieter, truer part, wanted to stay right where she was. Cole came in from outside, brushing snow off his coat. "Roads'll clear by noon," he said. "If you're planning to head back to town, I'll ride with you." Lena turned, her heart tightening. "You think I should go?" He hesitated, pulling off his gloves. I don't get to decide that." She studied him, the way he looked both strong and uncertain all at once. For all his pride and silence, he'd let her see a side of him that probably no one else ever had. She wanted to say something that mattered, something that could bridge the space between them. But all that came out was, "You burned the check." He paused, then nodded once. "Didn't need it anymore. Why?" she asked softly. "You could have written it, given it to me, proved your word." "I already did," he said, meeting her eyes. You stayed. You proved more than I ever bet against. Something in her chest broke open then. Something she'd been holding together for too long. You know, she said, her voice trembling just slightly, I came up here to win money for my sister. I thought if I could just survive one night, I'd finally fix everything. But now, she stopped, shaking her head. Now I don't even know what winning means anymore. Cole took a slow step toward her. Maybe it means not running anymore. She looked up at him, eyes bright. And what about you, Cole Maddox? What does winning mean to you? He gave a small, almost broken smile. You staying? The air between them stilled. The words hung there, honest and raw, with no place to hide. He didn't move closer, didn't reach for her. Not yet. He just stood there, hands loose at his sides, waiting. And in that patience she saw everything she'd ever wanted. Respect, care, and something that looked a lot like love. She set her cup down slowly. You think I'd fit in up here? With the snow, the silence, your wild horses and long nights? I think, he said softly. The ridge has been waiting for someone like you. Lena felt her throat tighten. She turned back to the window, watching sunlight spill across the snow. I used to think home was a place, she whispered. But maybe it's a person. He stepped closer, his voice low. Then I hope it's me. She turned then, and for the first time she didn't hold back. She reached for him, and he met her halfway, his hands finding her waist, hers clutching his coat. The kiss wasn't wild or hurried. It was slow, deep, and certain, like the snow melting off the pines. When they finally broke apart, they stayed close, foreheads touching, breath mingling in the cold air. I guess that means I'm staying, she said, smiling through tears. Cole chuckled quietly, brushing a thumb across her cheek. Guess that means I finally won a bet worth keeping. The rest of the morning unfolded like a dream. They saddled the horses, rode down toward the frozen creek, and watched the sun climb higher. The land glittered around them, endless and bright. Lena laughed, really laughed, the sound echoing through the valley. Cole rode beside her, smiling in that rare, quiet way that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. When they reached the ridge's edge, they stopped to look back. The cabin sat high on the hill, small but strong, smoke curling from its chimney. It looked like it belonged to them, not as a fortress against the world, but as a beginning. Lena turned to him. You think the storm will come back? It always does, he said. But we'll be here when it does. She nodded, then reached out and took his hand. Then let it. He squeezed her fingers gently, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. You sure about this? She smiled. That same brave, soft smile that had first caught his attention. I survived your mountain, cowboy. I think I can handle the rest, he laughed, the sound warm enough to melt frost. Then he leaned over, kissed her forehead, and said quietly, Welcome home, Lena. As they rode back toward the cabin, snow began to fall again. Light, gentle, forgiving. The wind whispered through the trees, not as an enemy now, but as a witness. Somewhere deep in the valley, the town of Silver Creek stirred awake, unaware that two stubborn hearts had found something sacred high above it. By the time night fell again, the fire inside Maddox Ridge glowed brighter than it ever had. Lena stood at the window, watching flakes drift past the glass, her heart steady for the first time in years. Behind her, Cole set his hat on the table, walked up, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. The world outside was cold, but in that cabin everything was warm, the kind of warmth that lasts a lifetime.